Good morning and a happy Father's Day to all our fathers, grandfathers and all those good father figures within our lives. There are so many amazing models of fatherhood that we are all thankful for. The greatest example, I believe, though, that every father has is the way in which God fathers us as his children. We've heard read today that he is a father to the fatherless, and of his wisdom that brings us protection. And although we're looking at the Lord being like a shepherd, we do see in Psalm 23 God's good fatherly care, guidance, correction, love, assurance. So I would like to continue our series through Psalm 23 today. We've been exploring some wonderful assurances in this psalm that are the possession of those who can say that the Lord, Christ the Good Shepherd, is my shepherd king. And let's remind ourselves of them. So we've seen, I shall not lack, or I shall not want, I'm satisfied. He restores my soul, I'm restored. And now this morning, I'd like us to look at, I will fear no evil. I'm undaunted. Fear is the most destructive and the most awful of conditions we might suffer from. Fear takes hold of a person. It filters its way into our hearts, confuses the mind, paralyzes courage, makes the soul prey to every evil attack. You know, fear is like the mugger lurking in dark shadows, waiting for the opportunity to rob us of every good blessing God wants to give us. A few weeks after we got our puppy, I was training him using his favourite treat, chicken. I'd worked out that he would do just about anything for chicken. So after lots of repetitions of sit, down, stand, I had some chicken left in this old bowl I'd found in a kitchen cupboard. So I just put the bowl down on the floor in front of our puppy. He immediately growled and went back, then forward towards it, then back. And it took me a moment to realise what was going on. But then it hit me, he was actually scared of this bowl. Do you know, he loved chicken, he just didn't like the bowl. Eventually he backed right away. He would do anything for chicken, but his fear of the bowl held him back. Do you know, fear holds us back. Fear mugs us of blessing. Fear robs us of the joy of today and even the blessings of tomorrow. The man who wrote this psalm knew all about fear. He's the David who, when just a shepherd himself and just a teenage shepherd, went to visit his brothers who were front-line soldiers on the northern side of the valley of Elah, a wide valley southwest of the city of Jerusalem. Across the other side of the valley were the Philistine army who challenged Israel to a fight. The person, they said, who could go one-on-one with their strongest warrior, Goliath from the city of Gath, a giant of a man, would be declared the victors. But no one dared. They were too afraid. In that valley, a whole nation was held by fear. But the young shepherd, David, knew the Lord was with him, and we know how that story ended in that valley. Now, some years later, that same David who trusted God in the valley of Elah wrote of trusting the Lord as his shepherd in another valley. Let's read Psalm 23 and verse 4. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. We're talking today about dark valley experiences, even the valley of the shadow of death. Now, please note what this psalm teaches us, this verse. When you turn and trust in Christ as a shepherd king of your heart, death is actually a shadow. You see, it holds no power, because the one who smashed its power on that first Easter morning lives within our hearts. You see, the shadow of a fist cannot hurt us. The shadow of a dog cannot bite us. The shadow of a sword cannot wound us. And the shadow of death cannot hold us. That's why the Apostle Paul, teaching on the resurrection of Jesus Christ, wrote, "O death, where is your sting? O grave, where is your victory?" And that's in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 55. Do you know, the second thing I'd like to note is that the shepherd walks us through. You see, last week we found he tells us to lie down in green pastures, to drink in the still waters. But he brings us through the dark valleys. Now, the valley of the shadow of death may not necessarily be the end of this earthly life, but perhaps even experiences that we go through in life. The valley of Elah, where Goliath was the valley of the shadow of death for David and the army of Israel. You know, when it's like evil just surrounds us, when we've been walking gladly along paths of righteousness, and all of a sudden the landscape changes. The path of life becomes more treacherous. The skies darken and a giant emerges. It may be the giant of relational strife. It may be the giant of work problems. It may be the giant of health concerns. Maybe even a giant of money problems. It's in the valley that fear lurks. But the assurance is that if Christ is your shepherd king, you can say with total confidence, "I shall not fear. Whatever may befall me, I'm undaunted." So why? How is it that we can respond to fear in this way? Well, the psalm gives us an answer. It says, "I will fear no evil, for you are with me." So firstly, he is still present. We're in the valley of the shadow of death. The green pastures now seem so far away. The still waters are not to be found. The right paths feel like they've somehow, gone wrong. Things have changed in the process of this psalm. But the one constant here is the presence of the shepherd king. He hasn't changed. He is the constant in this psalm. And you may not have noticed this, but the personal pronouns have changed too. They've gone from he. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters, speaking about Christ in the third person, to you. You are with me. Your rod and staff, they comfort me. Speaking about Christ in the second person. How amazing is it that Christ is revealed in an even more personal way in the dark valleys? Just like that famous poem, the Footprints poem. It's in the hardest times that there's only one set of footprints, because it's then that Christ carries us. So I will not fear. Undaunted. Why? Because you are with me. And he is still present. But then he goes on to say, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. So I have a rod and a staff here, made in the 20th century, so perhaps not all that authentic. But why do two bits of wood from a shepherd bring so much comfort to the psalmist? Let's explore, starting with the staff. You know, I left school at the age of 18 in the early 90s, just as we as a country were coming out of recession, and I spent almost an entire year out of work. I was constantly rejected at interview. I didn't quite know what I was going to do with my life. After 6 months, I was put on a government scheme called Job Club, which essentially meant doing exactly what I was doing, writing letters and sending CVs to prospective employers, but having to do so sitting behind a desk in a cold warehouse with a few dozen other, mainly men of all ages, who were doing the same. The radio was always on in the background, and there was a song that had just been released as part of an album by the Pretenders, and it was called I'll Stand By You. Now, I don't know what all the lyrics were, but there were a few lines, I've got to say, it felt that God himself was singing to me. It felt that strong. I think there were the lines that said something like, I'll stand by you, I'll stand by you, won't let nobody hurt you, I'll stand by you. Then it went, even to your darkest hour, and I'll never desert you, I'll stand by you. I can say, friends, 27 years on, and he has. He stood by me. He is the God who stands. And that's actually the purpose of the shepherd's staff. The Hebrew word for staff in Psalm 23 verse 4 simply means a walking stick, a support, something you lean on, something the shepherd would keep standing on. Okay, can I just keep this really quite simple? The staff reminds us the shepherd is still standing. So we've come to our second reason why we are undaunted. He still stands. What do I mean? That the picture we have of the Lord in the scriptures is that he sits. He is seated on a throne. Christ sits at the right hand of God, the Father, having accomplished his work to save us. Yes, he sits. He is in charge. He's done everything for us. But the amazing thing is, as he is seated above all, we could also say he stands with us. Now, forgive me if you're new to watching our services and maybe you're not all that familiar with these Bible stories, but he is the heavenly captain who stood before Joshua with the fearful prospect of Jericho before him. He is the Son of God who stood with Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego in the blazing furnace. And he is the risen Lord who, when Stephen, the first Christian martyr that we read of in Acts chapter 7, when he was passing through, literally, the valley of the shadow of death, he looked up and saw Christ standing up at the right-hand side of God. And can I say, friends, today, if he is your shepherd king, you can be undaunted, because even in the dark valleys of life, he is still present and his staff tells you something. He is still standing by you. But it's not just his staff that gives us comfort, it's his rod. Do you know, if we were to do some Bible study here, we discover that the word for rod in the Hebrew here in Psalm 23 literally just means a stick, a branch. It was a stick that a shepherd would use. In the Bible, we discover it was used to discipline, to correct, to keep the sheep in the right paths. It would also be used to defend the sheep, protecting them against a wolf or some other attacker. And because of this, the stick became a symbol of authority, of rulership. We're back to this shepherd king theme. He's the one who rules, who leads. Psalm 45 verse 6 says, "Your throne, O God, will last forever and ever. A scepter of justice will be the scepter of your kingdom." Now, the word scepter there, a scepter meaning a rod representing authority, is the same Hebrew word that's used for the shepherd's rod in Psalm 23 verse 4. The rod of the good shepherd that brings his comfort to us speaks of his authority. So why does his rod give us comfort? Because it tells us that even in the darkest of times, our shepherd king, who is still present, still standing with us, is still in charge. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Friends, can I say, if the rod and staff were in the hands of an enemy, I would be really quite concerned. If the power over my life was in the hands of the devil, or rested in fate, or even was in the hands of another person, I'd be concerned. But the truth of this psalm and the encouragement I'm bringing you today is that the rod of the shepherd that strikes, that corrects, that rules, is in the hand of my good shepherd, the king of my heart, and I'm comforted. I will fear no evil. In fact, I could say I'm undaunted. Did you know that the same David who defeated Goliath in the valley of Elah, that valley of the shadow of death, was actually back there a few years later? He had King Saul trying to kill him on one side and the Philistines on the other side. He was surrounded by evil. It was a dark valley as he made his way through the area, the geographical area of the valley of Elah towards a cave. And it was at that very time that he wrote the words of Psalm 56. He said, "O God, have mercy on me. For people are hounding me. My foes attack me all day long. I am constantly hounded by those who slander me, and many are boldly attacking me. But when I am afraid, I will put my trust in you, in God, whose word I praise. In God I trust. So why should I be afraid? What can mere mortals do to me?" There he was, back in the valley of the shadow of death, but undaunted, because God, whose word he praised, comforted him. Friends, for us today, his rod and his staff are his written word. His word that defeats the enemy. His word that corrects us and keeps us on the right path. Is his word that is his authority. His presence and his word, they comfort us. So let's go back to where I began. What's the fear holding you back from God and his blessings in your life today? Holding you back from taking that step? Holding you back from launching into the unknown in faith? Friends, turn to Christ. Trust in him as the shepherd king of your heart, and then go forward. Forward in his leading with nothing to fear, because he is still present, because he is still standing by, and because he is still in charge. So you can pass through dark valleys and say, I'm undaunted.